everybody. This is Latasha with the IAC. I'm the American Indian Foods Program Director, and I have our co-host, Mike Schellenberger, with me today. I am going to go ahead and, oh, okay, 1 second. Great, thank you so much, sorry. Perfect, never mind.
All right, sorry about that, Latasha. I guess I got to learn to read a little more carefully, and sorry for everybody for the few minute delay. I'm Michael Schellenberger, USDA Technical Assistant Specialist for Indian Tribes in Washington State, and I work for Intertribal Agricultural Council. And I want to welcome everybody. Today, this session, we're going to be uh, getting some information about the FSMA training. And first off, we're going to have I hope I get this right, Josiah Griffin, and he's a native Hawaiian and program and policy specialist for the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, bringing over 5 years of experience in analyzing tribal implications of federal policy and supporting increased access to agricultural resources. And then next up, we're going to have a Whitney Sawney or Sawney. I'm sure she'll clarify that. A citizen of the Cherokee Nation. She's a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. She's the communications manager and program specialist of the Indigenous. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. Food and Agricultural Initiative at the University of Arkansas, Office of American or of Economic Development, the IFAI. Thank you.
Great, so I think it's over at us now. So hello everyone, as he mentioned, my name is Whitney Sawney. I want to thank you for joining our team at the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative for our session today, and focused actually on the Indian Country Community Asset Directory, and an overview of bridging economies of scales for nonprofits. And first of all, before we get started, I do want to thank IAC and their entire team for all the hard work and having us here to share more about the asset directory, because I know that conferences are hard work and I just want to acknowledge all of the effort put forth by their team in bringing us all together virtually. So we're grateful for you all joining us for this presentation. And as I mentioned, we are here to talk about the Indian Country Community Asset Directory, which is an online platform developed in partnership with Crystal Echohawk and her team, our partners at Arabella Advisors. The website itself was designed by the native-owned Buffalo Nickel Creative, and this is all thanks to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for the support of the project as well. Jumping into an overview of who we are at the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative and our work in Indian Country. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Josiah Griffin.
So aloha kaku. My name is Josiah Griffin. I am Native Hawaiian and I'm the Program and Policy Specialist with the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. So as we are kind of moving forward through our discussion today with you, we'll be framing our discussion through a few different points, kind of leading into an overview of what the Indian Country Community Asset Directory is, some of its usability and function, and from there, we'll be bridging into a conversation on how to leverage philanthropic partnerships to scale agricultural enterprises, which really are kind of the backbone of the community asset directories, the backbone of kind of what we're doing here, building out kind of a directory of a community-driven, funder-focused model. And finally, we'll be wrapping up the conversation by kind of wrapping up with an actual community asset directory website demonstration. So before we start delving into the conversation about what the community asset directory is in full, it might be helpful to frame some of our work at the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. So one of the first questions that I always end up hearing, and Whitney, I'm sure it's the same way for you, is why did you start in the University of Arkansas? And so it really came out as a serendipitous partnership. As Janie Sims Hip, who is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, was leaving the Department of Agriculture, serving Secretary Vilsack, she had a longstanding connection with, at that time, Dean Stacy Leeds, who is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. And Dean Leeds was the first woman dean who is Native American of a law school across the country. And so as we were looking at kind of how to continue moving this conversation forward, the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative was established in 2013. Now, as we kind of build into our work leading into today and leading into kind of our conversations with partners, we really frame our work as kind of working to enhance health and wellness in tribal communities by advancing healthy food systems, diversified economic development, and cultural food traditions in Indian country. And so as we're doing as we're kind of acting as a partner in this way, we are also working to provide and support for legal and policy governance infrastructure through strategic legal analysis, policy research, and educational resources, really aiming to empower Indian country through food sovereignty, agriculture, and economic development in a way that is on their own terms, is also community and tribal driven. So we engage this space through a number of ways. Just as Indian countries' food systems are vast and there are a number of different touch points, we're working to support tribal nations and tribal food systems and kind of navigating these spaces through the development of a model tribal food and agriculture code to support governance considerations. We are a research partner for the Native Farm Bill Coalition, which is a coalition of over 170 tribes from across the country to help inform Farm Bill implementation and decision-making. We work with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration as the Tribal Food Safety Alliance and to help build out a stronger Native food safety and integrated network. We also support Native youth on an annual basis through our Native Youth and Food and Agriculture Summer Leadership Summit, where we bring in and host American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian youth from across the country to do a deep dive on aspects in agriculture that will kind of impact them now and also impact them in their future career development. We're regularly building out our work through that tribal-driven focus and a cultivating tribal food sovereignty approach, facilitating agricultural production through that food sovereignty lens. And in doing that, we're kind of supporting Native food enterprises and scaling up, identifying and pre-digesting policy frameworks that are on the horizon, like what we've seen with the rollout for hemp codes. And kind of reframing this is a way of kind of helping support longevity in food security and food access for tribal communities nationwide. So with that, I will turn it back over to Whitney.
Sounds great. Thank you, Josiah. So I would like to provide a little bit more background on the directory itself. So ultimately, this is a living resource that elevates and amplifies food and agriculture and health equity innovations in Indian country. So this directory is, as Josiah had mentioned, community driven and funder focused. And thanks to the research conducted by Illuminative, we know that 3% of philanthropic funding goes to Indian country, which is a small number. And 2/3 of that funding then defaults to non-native organizations working with Indian country. And with that in mind, the purpose of this online directory is to really break down the barriers to philanthropic investment in food systems work and health equity work led by tribal governments, native producers, tribally owned enterprises, and Indigenous food and health experts. In the development of the directory, our partners at Arabella Advisors led an initial funder needs assessment, at which this assessment helped identify what those barriers and challenges were to investing in native-led food sovereignty efforts. And that assessment found that barriers included things like a lack of basic knowledge about Indian country and cultural competency, or a lack of understanding of how sometimes those grant-making strategies and practices can sometimes perpetuate already existing inequities. So there was a need for a tool that could effectively and efficiently filter by issue areas or geographies or audience base to help funders identify those native-led entities leading this innovative work. So to build this directory, our team at IFAI utilized a 2-tiered survey approach with survey structures that would allow for communities to self-define their own work and tell their own story. Because as we mentioned several times, I'm going to keep reiterating this point that this is community driven. And this comes from the people that the programs serve. Our initial survey that was sent out was open to everyone. It was accessible online, through social media, through the website, through conferences like this, and shared out to audiences of our partner organizations. And the survey was a tool that was used to nominate a program or a project or an organization in the community that anyone knew of leading this work. People could also self-nominate in this process. And then we developed a second level survey, and that was sent to all of the nominated entities focused on defining what makes their work innovative and what makes their work successful, which helped then inform the structure of the directory itself. So I do want to briefly touch base on some of the top line findings and tell the story of what our initial surveys found. So Josiah, if you want to go to the next slide, please. This word cloud reflects the most frequently used words to describe the work that, that is being led by these organizations. And as a part of our survey process, we asked entities to nominate, or we asked the entities nominated to expand on what their work is focused on. And more than half of the nominees are directly engaged with their community. And you can see that with words such as community, traditional, sovereignty. These are all reflected here in this word cloud as the most frequently used words. And then the next slide shows more of a geography scope of across Indian country and the regions of the entities nominated. So 41% of those entities identified serve a single tribal community, while 14% serve Indigenous people nationwide. Then we also have an overview on the next slide of an organizational creation. So the reason that these entities were created in the first place. And 54% were created or founded by community members to address an issue, for example, food insecurity or access to healthy and traditional foods. And 14% were created by tribal governments. And then we go into defining success here on the next slide. And this reflects how success was defined by the organizations nominated. So 89% of them, which is a large majority, had a focus on tradition and culture. And they said that that's what makes their work a success. And then that's sort of an overview of the top line data takeaways that really help tell the story about the asset directory and what it represents for Indigenous-led food systems and health equity work. So I'll actually turn it over to Josiah to expand more about how you can leverage these opportunities and utilize this platform as a nonprofit.
Thank you, Whitney. So as we're discussing opportunities to kind of leverage and partner more effectively, I'm framing this, and I want to frame this in a little bit of a different way, at least to start. And I know some of you might be looking at this graph saying, you know, you're in the wrong subject area. This really should be talking about economics. As we're talking about opportunities to leverage and opportunities to kind of build on the efficiencies of the nonprofits that are working in this space and that are serving their communities in a good way, we really have to talk about how partnership is structured and how that structure impacts the community asset members or organizations' ability to do good work in a good way that isn't cost prohibitive. And so as we're looking at this, we've built it out in terms of this framework of an economy of scale. And for anyone who's not familiar with kind of the definition of what an economy scale is, or maybe it's just been a little while, we can generally think about it as the ability of an organization or enterprise to use or develop a cost advantage by maintaining and promoting and building into their own kind of organizational efficiencies. And so the idea here is that as you have one more unit of production or one more unit of service that the community asset member is able to provide to their kind of stakeholders or to their service area, either their average costs are going to go down by kind of them being able to kind of work in this space and add additional quantity or quality to that work, where their average total cost is going to increase. And so as we are kind of building into this perspective of kind of how do you navigate that, right? How do you build into the differences for if we are supporting community assets in a way that will mitigate costs or in a way that actually is constraining their effectiveness. Some of the things that we might look at are how can program output scale rather than kind of increase the average cost for providing a product or service, and how can scaling program outputs be goods, services that are provided by community assets. So how can those outputs scale social impact? As we're kind of moving forward, the goal of, I generally assume that the goal for funding these organizations is to support their ability to serve their community members in a better or a broader way. And so as we are looking at kind of building into this idea of economies of scale, as the marginal cost of implementing a program or a service kind of decreases the average total cost as you move kind of down in this space, you're working in an economy of scale. And in doing so, you are, again, building into the advantage that a firm is able to achieve. By firm, I am also meaning like community asset here, that the community asset achieves through targeted strategies that increase production or service levels while proportionately saving cost. And if you are thinking about opportunities to kind of support organizations in building out or implementing an economy of scale, one ready example might just kind of generally be kind of providing capital financing for infrastructure so that organizations would be able to assign staff that are kind of managing those kind of day-to-day administrative operations into tasks that are kind of more robust and kind of moving the needle on what their program or project level looks like. But if you are looking at kind of if something is framed in a situation or a context where the organization is moving into a diseconomy of scale, they're moving into a space where you might be operating above and beyond what your efficiencies readily allow for. And so you have to kind of redouble efforts in kind of the time that it takes to provide a service, or you have to kind of move into this space where you're not operating as efficiently as you otherwise could be. And so we can generally reference these as like operational and market constraints that increase the cost per unit of production. And so if a funder was to come in and try to partner with a community asset member in a way that didn't reflect the community-driven kind of basis of that asset's operational structure, you might inadvertently be moving them into a space where they are operating in a diseconomy of scale. So why does this philosophy matter? Like, why should we even be considering whether or not we're operating in an economy or a diseconomy of scale? And now I think is one of kind of the best times to start looking at these things if we haven't already, because COVID-19 has bubbled up issues in supply chains and food access for Indian country that tribal communities have already been facing, but in many ways it's exacerbated these issues. And so as we're looking at an emerging situation or an emergent situation where there are pressing needs and there's this idea of acting now, there may be easy to kind of want to step in as a funder or step in as a partner immediately without taking a look at what's actually necessary and what would actually be the most helpful for the communities that you're operating with or intending to partner with in that service area. And so we're kind of building into this space. We can also think about how markets for resources and supplies can be competitive. And especially as we're operating or are working with kind of nonprofit organizations or other types of community assets, the ability to tap into these resources may either be scarce or may either be otherwise be kind of difficult to kind of acquire because they are cost prohibitive. And so in kind of stepping in as a partner, it may be a matter of helping to open up markets, open up areas of service through infrastructure or through kind of building networks of connection. As we are kind of moving into this space too, we kind of must kind of operate within the understanding that there is, generally speaking, there's need out there, right? These community assets are here for a reason. They are trying and they're working to serve their community and to make a difference. But as they are kind of providing these services, their ability to kind of access and utilize and capitalize on resources can be kind of cost prohibitive. And in doing so, it makes it harder to compete with kind of larger enterprises that are otherwise operating in this space. So there's generally like a concern of being priced out of the market, where you can't acquire the goods that you need to operate and do what you're supposed to do within your mission or your objective. And so as a funder or as a partner, you might be able to help them in offsetting some of these kind of costs associated with kind of navigating these economies of scale one way or the other. And as we look at this kind of overall, right, across the board, the ability of community assets to scale in a way that supports food systems will become increasingly important. We are dealing with ever complex legal and commercial and economic environments. And so being able to support community assets and support Indian country food systems as a partner will help support and provide for the longevity of food access and the ability of communities of tribal nations to really feed themselves on their own terms, which kind of underlies the essence of food sovereignty. So we've talked about kind of what it looks like to build out economies of scale. And so as we're thinking about opportunities to partner, we wanted to break down some kind of more concrete examples of ways that you might partner with a community asset in building out either or supporting internal and external economies of scale. And so starting out by looking at kind of internal economies of scale as a reference point, kind of one of the first things that you might look at and might consider is kind of capital infrastructure investments, which may otherwise be kind of cost prohibitive for the nonprofit organization that you would be working with. As I'm kind of walking through the frameworks or some considerations for internal economies of scale and how to work with nonprofit organizations in Indian country, I also want to underline and underscore that these partnerships should really be conducted in a way that that supports and empowers their efficiencies, supports and empowers their ways of looking at things, how they define outputs, how they define service to their community, what their culture tells them is appropriate and is meaningful to do in serving their community in this way. And so how capital infrastructure investments may be proposed may be a little different than what you've traditionally expect to hear through other conversations or discussions with non-native entities. And so being open-minded and coming to the table with a position of understanding and a position of listening and a position of partnership and support that long-term relationship building. So some additional considerations for supporting and empowering internal economies of scale may refer to helping organizations build out and develop their staff expertise, so that as their staff members become more effective or efficient in navigating situations on their own, their their work and their service level and their ability to serve their community expands and builds with them. Some considerations may also refer to helping support increased operational efficiencies, like looking at different technologies and innovations to help streamline some of this work. Inventory management, as we're especially looking at what it means to build out a food system and a food supply chain in Indian country. The general consideration, of course, that many people defer back to with looking at an economy of scale also refers to nonprofits, right? How do you spread out the fixed costs of what they're doing over a broader output level? And then finally, operating in a way, like I said, that you are leveraging community partnerships and separate organizations as a partner first. As we're looking at some considerations for building out and empowering external economies of scale, those aren't firm specific, but those might be more market specific. So how do you set up an environment or support an environment for native food systems that empowers and reinforces the ability of community assets to thrive in this space? And so helping to support this network or framework of community and tribal government investment or policy might be an important role. And that's something that the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative has worked to do through our Model Tribal Food Code. Helping to support and build out community assets and infrastructure so that community members are more readily able to take advantage of the offerings that are made available through these community assets. Support for nearby education institutions like tribal colleges and tribal universities, which help to inform the next generation of leaders for how to work in this space, and some considerations that they might want to use in managing expectations. And so as we're building out education institutions and the student base, the learning opportunity within the community and supporting that, there is a different pool of individuals that organizations might be able to work with or hire so that they can operate in a way that moves the needle in a good way. And then of course, as we're looking at how do you support building out these food system markets to empower community assets as their own enterprises and organizations, being available as a partner is necessary to actually work through this. So as we're looking at how all of these things apply to the Indian Country Community Asset Directory, I know Whitney will be walking through, Whitney will be presenting a walkthrough of the asset directory in real time. but we wanted to highlight a couple of pieces in advance so that as you're thinking about these things, as you're thinking about ways to align your mission and ways to partner more effectively in service to kind of specific stakeholders or specific target populations or areas of operation. The asset directory allows for building out those connections and identifying partnership opportunities. And in kind of looking at this too, we've also referenced this as a framework of recognizing the efficiencies and the network and body of knowledge that is already available and in place in Indian country. And so I would be remiss without kind of highlighting the profiles and innovation that have so graciously shared their information with us so that it can be posted on the community asset directory as kind of partners in being able to help inform some of these decisions moving forward. So if you have questions, if you have comments, we're more than happy to talk with you after this event, during this conversation here today. But we did also want to make sure that you had copies of the email addresses for each and every one of our staff. So please feel free to reach out to us with any comments, questions, thoughts, as we would love to be able to talk with you. So with that, I will turn it back over to Whitney.
Great, thank you, Josiah. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right. Josiah, just give me a quick confirmation. Is that being shared?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, perfect. So here is the actual asset directory website. So the URL is indiancountryassetmap.com. It's kind of a long domain there. Sorry about that. But here on the homepage, you will see first and foremost our interactive map. So one of the takeaways and some of the feedback we received through the funder needs assessment for how this directory can be interactive and based off what filters would be helpful to identify those Native-led entities to be able to really support their work and start with that relationship building. One of the feedbacks was requesting a breakdown per region. So here on the interactive map, you can just select any region you'd like. So let's say, for example, I wanted to do the Southwest region. It then auto-populates to these different organizational profiles that include an overview and a breakdown. It includes information about their website, a point of contact as available, social media as available. And then what we also have is if you read more and it goes to the organization profile, not only does it provide an overview, which is approved and written, and we collaborate with the organization itself before anything is published at all. We also include keywords such as like a school-based program or a training program. We also include keywords related to populations served, if they serve the tribal community or schools or Native youth, and their scope of work. For example, developing skills and opportunities for tribal community members or promoting healthy food and healthy communities. All of this information and these keywords come from that survey, that second level tier survey that I discussed earlier, that we share and collaborate with the organization to be able to identify these different filters so that funders can connect with their work. So this is what the organization profile looks like. And this, as I said, this directory is supposed to be a living resource. It's supposed to be something that is continually updated. It's easier than having something that's printed because work changes, right? And we see even with this year how sometimes directions of organizations can change with COVID, right? You have rapid response and that could really alter some of the direction of the organizations themselves. And we want to be able to have a resource that can be updated in real time. And then not only are these keywords clickable and you can kind of flow through as you go through the website, we also have the directory drop-down menu as Josiah had showed before. Here are the filters. So we break it down based off of regions, organizational types, everything from the nonprofit to for-profit businesses. We break it down off of keywords like community garden or farm, cooking demonstrations, policy and research focused organizations, populations. So this is populations served. If they serve Alaska Native, elders, Native youth, urban natives, and then scope of work. So building community assets, improving health outcomes for community members, increasing access to traditional food, and then you can select those. So let's say if I select Native youth, and then auto-populates those results there. So that is the directory. And then we have these profiles and innovation, as Josiah had mentioned. These are more in-depth views and interviews with our partner organizations. And they provide models and examples, and we're really grateful for them sharing their work with us. Like I said, they include interviews. You can click to read more. They have statistics. So really, it's a good foundational basis for funders who are looking at this resource to be able to learn more about who's leading this work. And then we also have a list of content experts to really help begin fostering those connections and relationships between philanthropic investors and our organizations and entities included on the directory. So if you have suggestions for these, we're always open to receiving feedback. Please stay in communication with us and our team. But again, these are links to their websites and additional information as available. And then we have, in addition to that, our fact sheets, which really help provide funders that foundational understanding of tribal sovereignty, Indian Country 101 and backgrounds, research in Native communities, and what that really looks like. We do have downloadable infographics and policy briefs. For example, this Indian Country 101 provides just the general diversity of Indian Country and what, how it's not just a one solution for everyone. There's so much diversity, and especially even the work that's being done. And then we also have an overview of Indian Country agriculture work. So this has an overview of American Indian and Alaska Native producers, and this could help provide that scope and help funders have that better basic understanding of this work that's happening. We also have our fact sheets here. These are really covering the topics of funding research in tribal communities, an overview of health disparities in nutrition, an overview of Indian Country agriculture and food systems, land, natural resources and water, and then tribal sovereignty and governance. So these are also there available to them. We also have additional resources, articles, media, and research, sort of this compilation of resources that the funders can take a deeper dive into. So these are constantly updated as well. And then the last piece here is just a little bit more information about some of our partners and really about why this matters and about the philanthropic investment in Indian Country. So with that, I also want to do a quick overview of how you can submit information about your organization, because this is growing all the time. So if you would like to submit your organization and nominate that, or if there is a program or an entity in your community that you receive services from that you're just really wanting to highlight and have them included on this resource, please get in contact with us. If there's a delay in anything, you can always reach out to us via email. But this initial submission form allows for you to give an overview and what you know about the organization, and then how that process works. We then follow up with the organization that was nominated, either through the point of contact provided, or we'll do our own connections and let them know that we'd like to include them on this resource, or a community member would like to include them on this resource. And we then do that second level tier survey where we get additional information so that we can break down those filters and accurately represent the work that they're doing. We do obviously have our own data privacy. It's all voluntary. We don't publish any information without permission of the organization itself. So we just want to make sure that that's reiterated there. I'm a great point of contact, Whitney, Sawney. Josiah, if you want to put up our contact information there again, but that's just a brief overview of how this is structured. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you. I have a question for you all that somebody submitted, and it states, have you all been tracking the Justice for Black Farmers Act, wondering how Indigenous peoples were consulting and how we can work together for Black liberation on Native land?
I think that's a great opportunity. I'd love for the person to reach out to us directly so that we can learn more and find ways to partner and also make connections through some of the organizations and entities that are leading this work on the ground. And I think this tool is a great way to start making those initial connections.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other questions? Please get them in now so we can make sure that you get those answered. Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay, here we go. We've got another question. Are there any plans to expand beyond those 2 imaginary lines to your north and your south?
I think that's a great opportunity to do that. Josiah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but would love to be able to expand this even just to represent and accurately represent Indigenous communities, even just beyond the, our current 50 states. So.
Great, sorry about that. I don't know if I had paused something, but so I just wanted to share for those that are participating in this session, there is a little button that you'd have to click to submit questions. It's right next to the session details, and it's a live Q&A. So if you want to ask them some questions, feel free to upload those questions in that little portion there. We do have one more question. How do you respond to researchers and people wanting to use this database? What does consent from folks in the directory look like?
Sorry, I had to unmute that for a second. So we do have a data privacy policy. We do basically, as I mentioned, it's all voluntary participation. We ask for informed and affirmative consent. So anyone, although anyone can nominate an organization to be included in the directory, we do not automatically include that nominated organization upon receiving that. So we do seek informed consent from those organizations, and then we go through a collaborative process to develop the information that they would like to provide as an entry, as an organizational profile to be included. So all ownership of data, images, and other materials that are shared with us remain within the directory itself. And with the organizations or individuals that develop them. So that is kind of what we go through our process. It's not just an automatic submission and it's uploaded. We have a collaborative process with that entity to ensure that.
And building off of that, it's not our intent to kind of reflect that the community asset directory represents the entirety of work that is happening in Indian country to date. And we very much recognize that this is a living document, this is a living directory, and that we can only engage this space in a good way, as Whitney was saying, with that informed consent of the community asset member or organization that would be represented.
So it really can be utilized as a tool to start that relationship building and foster those connections. That's ultimately the purpose of that.
Okay, any more questions, Latasha, that you might see?
No, I don't see any other questions. So we can close out, or if you have any questions, Mike.
I don't. I just want to state, everybody, that thank you so much for spending your time with us today and for our 2 presenters. Also, I want to make sure that we give a big shout out to our sponsors for this particular section. And it was sponsored by the Champions of Native Agriculture and Resource Legacy Fund. Thank you so much. And also, our next session will be starting at 1 o'clock, correct, Latasha? Good. All good meetings
Right.
start on
Yes.
time and all good meetings end on time. Once again, thank you all very much. We'll see the rest of you at 1 o'clock. And also, Indigenous. I got it right that time. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye now.
Thank you.